This week on Camera Talk, we are talking about sensors. Does sensor size really matter?
How big is it?
Well, from what I hear, I think it does. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the difference between a full frame sensor, an APS-C sensor, and a micro four thirds sensor. Those are kind of your more typical ones. There's other ones out there, but those are the three most common anyway. So let's take a look at each one individually and why one is better than another, and the advantages and disadvantages and so forth and so on, and plus learn what the heck a sensor does anyway, so that's what we're here for. So take a few minutes, go grab yourself something to drink, come on back, and hey, let's get it on.
Here I am, Vietnam. Rain is always coming down.
This is Camera Talk with Dr. Scott. Okay, this week, as the intro says, we're not really going to look at lenses or camera bodies or techniques or really anything like that. What we're going to talk about this week really plays an important role in really the type of camera and the type of photography you're going to be doing. And that's to talk about sensor size, not exercise, sensor size. Does size really matter?
Oh, size as in height or width or strength. There's so many different sizes.
Well, with some things it does. But with other things, such as cameras, they also matter. Where was I going with that? Anyway, sensor size matters. And I'm going to go through, the pros and cons of the different sensor sizes out there and really kind of do an overview anyway. I'm not going to get all technical on you because there's plenty of videos out there getting into the science of the actual diodes and how deep and how many bits and this and that are to go together, even though I'm going to mention them, but I'm not going to, again, spend an hour and a half talking about them. So I'll just kind of scratch the surface, hopefully help you understand when you're making a selection of the type of camera, not only camera, whether it's a Sony or a Canon or a Leica or anything else, but the actual sensor size itself and how that plays into the type of photography that you're practicing. So, to kind of start at the top, there's three sensor sizes which are relatively common in the world of photography. Of course, there's other ones too, medium formats, large formats, so on and so forth, but most of us don't shoot in those. And when I say most of us, I'm talking about the average, person out there. Professionals, a whole different ballgame, but enthusiasts and hobbyists and so forth and so on, we tend to stick with full frame, APS-C, and micro four thirds. Those are the three that, generally we shoot with. Now, of course, there's, I have an iPhone 10 or iPhone XS, which we use to shoot photos as well, but I don't care about that. I actually did a video about smartphone photography already, so I'm not going to talk about sensors there because they're only this big. They'll never compare to something like this. Well, I can't say never. Maybe someday, somewhere off in the future, they'll produce some kind of smartphone that'll be able to compete with large sensors like a full frame sensor on my A7R2 here. But so let me differentiate the three. So full frame is kind of your standard. It was based upon film size. Back in the day, it was ever since people have been shooting with SLRs in film, the size of the actual frame itself horizontally was 36 millimeters by 24 millimeters. So that's what they based the full frame sensor size on. Now others like APS-C are a smaller version of that sensor, and they call it a cropped sensor. So in that case, there's two real common styles. There's a 1.5 crop, which is, you know, Sony and Nikon and you know, Fuji and so forth and so on. And then you get Canon, which my Canon M50 is an APS-C, and it's got a crop size of 1.6, so it's a little smaller than the other APS-C size sensors. Why they do that, who knows? Send them an email and ask them. I don't really care.
I don't care.
Works for me. But you know, the APS-C size, as I said, the full frame is 36 by 24. The APS-C size 1.5 crop sensor is 23.6 times 15.7. That's a 1.5 size. The APS-C 1.6, the Canon, is smaller than that. It is 22.2 millimeters by 14.8. So again, 23.6 by 15.7 compared to 22.2 times 14.8. So as you can see, it's a smaller, you know, it's a smaller surface size. And then the micro, oh, well, I don't have a micro four thirds, but micro four thirds, which is Olympus and Panasonic, they make a micro four thirds sensor, which is a 2 times crop sensor size, and it is 17.3 millimeters by 13. So it's, you know, again, that much smaller than the full frame sensor. So why does that matter? You know, who cares what it's the megapixels, right? Yeah, everybody's all like crack addicts, heroin addicts about the megapixels. I gotta have megapixels, baby. Megapixels are where it's at. It's actually not, but that depends, you know. If you're gonna compare the number of megapixels that a camera offers, like example, my full frame A7R2 has 42 megapixels. My Leica M10 has 24 megapixels. Well, then the Sony A7R2 must be better, right? It's got more megapixels, but it's on the same size sensor. It's still within that 36 by 24. So what does that mean? It means you're getting more megapixels per real estate. You know, if this was my little full frame sensor, you're getting more megapixels in that real estate than you are with the 24. And a megapixel, of course, is a million.
1 million.
That's what the unit of measure is for that anyway. So 42 megapixels is 42 million pixels. Which again, you know, you want to drill down into that, or photo sites. And a photo site is actually connected to an electronic diode. Now you may know that term diode, something like an LED, right? A light emitting diode is what an LED stands for. So diode has to do with light, whether it's emitting light or capturing light. So the photo site is actually the most important part. Just as I said, the megapixels, everybody's high on megapixels, right? 50 megapixels, 60 megapixels, 100 megapixels. Sounds sexy, doesn't it? But you're still putting those 100 megapixels in that same little real estate. Especially cell phones. You see cell phones out there now advertising all these high megapixels. A cell phone sensor is only this big, tiny little thing. So you're putting the megapixels in that tiny little footprint. And as I was just alluding to, the photo site is the important part of the sensor, because the photo site is what captures the light. And that's what a sensor really does anyway. The whole job of a sensor is to capture that light, and then it takes that light data and it transfers that into binary codes and algorithms, and creates the zeros and ones and zeros, and again, translates that into data information, which your camera then turns into the photograph that you produce, whether it's a JPEG or whether it's a RAW file, whatever. But anyway, that's the kind of gist of the whole thing. So the photosite, the diode, and the size of that photosite is much, much, much more important than the number of megapixels. Now again, the old "it depends" thing, you can have I don't want to say a million, we're not quite even there, we're barely at 100. You can have a 100 megapixel full frame sensor, but because the diodes then have to be much smaller than, let's say, an 18 megapixel camera with the same size sensor. So their photosites are going to be larger, which means they're capturing more light data. But the higher the megapixel in that same footprint, under the right conditions, let's say you're outside and the light is great and everything else, you can actually capture more detail in the higher megapixel sensor. So again, that's why I have my A7R2 versus my original A7 up there, which is a 24 megapixel, the same as my Leica here, which is the same as my Canon, which is a 24 megapixel, but it's a cropped sensor, so those photo sites again are going to be smaller on my M50 than they are on the M10 or on the A7. But my A7R2, because it has 42 megapixels, those photo sites are smaller, but there's more of them, so therefore they're capturing just more data, which means you can, under the right lighting conditions, produce better detail. And that's why you get better resolution out of a higher megapixel, which means you can crop in on a 42 megapixel file and still pull out some great detail on, even though it's a cropped image, versus the 24. If you crop in too closely, you're going to enlarge that, the crop is going to enlarge it, and therefore you're going to see more noise or more artifacts or other issues going on with that. So that's going to be really the difference between the higher megapixel versus the larger photo site. So again, the larger the photo site means the more light is captured, and this is all about light, right? Photography is all about light. Even dark photos. If you have a camera with really high ISO and low megapixel count on a full frame, like the A7, the A7S, had a smaller megapixel count. Therefore, the photo sites were larger, which means it could capture more light, even in the dark, as long as it's not pitch black. As long as there's some kind of light, whether it's moonlight, street lights, candle lights, whatever it could be, it'll capture that light much better because it's a bigger photo site, and it'll therefore produce better quality photographs in low light situations, larger apertures on your lenses, and so forth and so on. So that's why a full frame sensor is always going to be better than the sensor on your smartphone, regardless of what the megapixels say, because on your smartphone, the lens is this little tiny thing, the sensor is this little tiny thing. Therefore, yes, it's capturing light data, it's capturing some details, but a lot of that is generated through the onboard computer. The software is producing the image that you see. Versus, the same thing happens on these cameras, on digital cameras, mirrorless cameras, but the sensor itself is capturing much more of that detail and much more of that light. So it's more of a true representation of what the camera is capturing in that regard. So the other benefit too is, you know, on a crop sensor camera like my M50, I can use something like my, actually, what is this? That's my Carl Zeiss planar 50mm 1.4. This is a super lens. Really is a good lens. You can watch the video on that. But on my full frame, it is a 50mm. But on my crop sensor camera, you multiply that by 1.5 or 1.6 or by 2 times whatever. So on my M50, this is closer to being like a portrait lens. It would be like an 80mm. On an Olympus or a Panasonic, it'll be a 100mm lens, or the equivalent of. Therefore, again, the purpose of your photography, you know, and why your sensor size matters. You know, if you're photographing, let's say, wildlife, you know, birds and lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Oh, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
You probably want to be far away from that, right? You don't want to be up close within, you know, a few meters and end up as somebody's dinner. You know, if you have a crop sensor camera, crop sensor setup, whether it's a Canon or a Sony or Olympus or Fuji or whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, the system is the system. But it's the fact that the cropped sensor affords you that extra reach. You know, again, it turns a 200mm lens with a 1.5 crop into a 300mm lens. So it gives you that farther reach without having to increase the size of or the focal length of your lens like you would on a full frame sensor. The downside of that, though, too, with a crop sensor is the reverse of that, which is a wide angle. You know, because again, a wide angle on a full frame is going to give you the 21 or 16 or 10, or, you know, I have a 7.5 fisheye. You know, again, you put those on a crop sensor, and that wide angle is now narrow. You lose the wide angleness, so to speak. So again, it has its benefits for long distance, but it kind of sucks when it comes to wide angle. So again, depending on the type of photography that you're in is going to determine the type of sensor size which is important to you. As I said, the brand doesn't matter, you know, whether it's a Sony or a Canon or a Fuji or Olympus or Panasonic or Leica or anything else. The brand is the brand, but it's the sensor size that's going to make that difference for you. So let me tell you about bit size, just a little bit of that.
How big is it?
What?
You know, how big is it?
All right, now speaking of bits, little bits of things here and there, you know, to get just a tad bit more technical when it comes to the sensor itself. Again, the photo sight, which, as I told you, is a diode. It's an electronic, you know, component that captures light. It also emits light. But the photo sight converts light, which is all about photography, into data, and its electronic signal then gets translated into a digital algorithm, which then turns it into, or converts it into binary code, which is a digit code, which is ones and zeros. You know, you've all seen that before, I'm sure. Even if you've not taken computer classes and so forth and so on, you'll know that that's binary code, is the ones and zeros out there. So the bits then represent really a few things. One is color. So the reds, greens, and blues, you know, and remember too, before I forget to say, sensors, when they're just a bare bones sensor, are black and white. They're capturing light, just plain white light, which is not plain white light, by the way. It's a multitude of colors, but it just captures the light. And then what companies will do is put a Bayer filter over top of that sensor, and it's covered with, and I'm sure you've seen photos of that. Actually, here's one right here. And what those are red, green, and blue little sites that are filters, I should say, that cover the photo sites, so that they filter out the other colors and capture the reds, or capture the greens, or capture the blues. Now again, you can go on to other sites to learn all about color science and everything else. I'm not going to go into it here, but that's what they capture. So again, like an M10 monochrome does not have that Bayer filter, so therefore, if it's a, what is the monochrome, 40 megapixels? Might be more than that, but I think it's 40 megapixels. Each one of those photo sites in the 40 million that are on that full frame sensor are just capturing the light. They're not filtering any colors or anything else, so the data you're getting is actually more pure, which is why the dynamic range on a monochrome camera, which is technically a black and white camera, is better than taking a photo in color and then converting it to black and white later. And unless you're into black and white photography, like a monochrome isn't going to do you really any justice at all, because we live in a color world. Most people take color photos, but black and white has its place in the world, and they're very cool. Again, I don't want to get into black and white. We can talk about that in another video, but again, back to the Bayer color filter, the reds, greens, and blues. They're not equal across. You may think because there's 3, you divide that by 100, you get 33.33%. But that's not really how they're laid out anyway. The reds, there's 20% of them. The greens are 70%, and the blues are 7%. When you calculate how many of those dots are on your color filter. And of course, if you're swift enough to do the math on that, you'll say, well, that's not 100%. Well, 3% is the space in between those little dots, that are covering the filter. There's actual space in there that are not colored, so that's the 3% is, uncolored stuff. But anyway, as we're talking about the bits, so data is captured in the photo site. It's capturing the color, it's capturing the brightness, and it's capturing the location. It's not capturing a location, but it's reporting the location of those pixels on the sensor itself. So again, it can translate that into your final product, into your photograph. The bit depth itself too. Again, the size of the photo site, and again, we're not talking, really how deep it is, but how big it is. Because the surface is actually more important than the depth, because light needs to be, the photons need to be captured on the widest surface possible. In that regard. So there's a difference between 8-bit, 16-bit, 24-bit, and so on, 64, on and on we go. It translates into the number of tones, color tones, that the photo site can capture. So an 8-bit photo site is going to capture 256 tones. 16-bit is going to capture 32,000 tones. 24-bit is going to capture 16.7 million tones, and so on and so on and so on. So the higher you go, the more color and brightness and whatever it can capture in that photo site itself. So anyway, so that's you know, I don't want to get into the technical details because you probably don't really care anyway. But as I said, the sensor size, whether it's full frame, APS-C, micro four thirds, is important in itself, but the number of megapixels depends on the purpose of your photography. Again, if you're in total daylight, bright daylight outside all day long, higher megapixels are probably going to be great for you, because those smaller photo sites are going to be able to capture that bright light that's out there anyway, and get you more detail in your final photograph. If you're shooting in lower light situations, you know, you're doing whether nighttime photography, or you're doing mood photography, or you're doing I don't know, music videos or things like this where the lighting may be a little lower than, you know, midday sun out there, then you're going to want a megapixel count that's going to be actually smaller, because it means your photo sites are going to be larger, enabling you to capture that light to get you a better quality output at the end. Now we have ISO, and of course, you know, ISO can be raised to produce a gain in the sensitivity of that diode, to allow, you know, kind of an artificial lightening or brightening of the of that particular light data that's captured. But, you know, the higher the data, or the higher the ISO number, the more likelihood that you may be introducing noise, you know, electronic noise into the photograph itself, which sometimes cannot be compensated for. You know, whether it's Lightroom or any of your photo editing software may not be able to fix that. So it's best to keep your ISO as low as possible, even though sometimes it's just not possible to do so. Therefore, you know, the more modern cameras have a better ISO response than older cameras. You know, as I say, like my M10 Leica is very different from my M9 Leica. You know, the M10 is very comfortable at you know, 1250 or 1600, versus my M9, you pretty much want to go as high as maybe 800 on your ISO. And you know, again, it all has to do with the technology and the day that we're in and so forth and so on. But you know, the moral of the story is, as time goes on, the sensors that we have in our cameras are going to enable us to do more. But as I say, it depends on the type of photography that you're expecting to get out of your camera. So you have to think about that. Anyway, that's really the whole purpose of this video, is to talk about, you know, why sensor size matters. And not only that, the sensor size itself, but the number of megapixels on that particular sensor size is going to matter to you and going to make a difference. As I said, my full frame, actually I won't use that, I'll use this one as example. My full frame M10, 24 megapixel, versus my Canon M50 APS-C megapixels, which is 24, so 24 and 24. These 24 megapixels are going to be able to capture more better quality light data than the 24 megapixel on my APS-C sized 1.6 crop factor on my Canon M50. So if I was going to use for still photography, for example, taking a photo of one thing versus another, my M50 is going to get me a better quality photo. Let's say I'm using the same lens. So if I, what do I have on here? Oh, I have a 75 Summarit 2.4 on here. So if I use this on my Canon M50, for one thing, there's the crop factor on that, so it's not going to be a 75 anymore. But the quality of the photograph itself, because those 24 megapixels, the photo sites themselves are smaller than they are on this full frame sensor, the quality on this one is going to produce a better photograph than on my Canon. Now again, what does it come down to? It comes down to printing, right? Or where you're displaying your final photographs. And that's why JPEG versus RAW is another, again, another argument out there. But again, with, my 42 megapixel A7R2, I'm able to, if I want to print, I can print something billboard size, very large, because of the amount of data that the 42 megapixels is collecting. It allows me to create a larger print, of course under the right lighting conditions and everything else. As long as that's right, it can produce a better quality, detailed, blow up picture than can my 24 or my 24 APS-C. So again, the file size too is another issue, and it also has to do with performance. The larger 42 megapixel file size is going to slow down the performance of your camera, because it has to produce these huge files which write to your SD card. So it's going to slow down your photos. And for me, I'm a single photo shooter anyway. I'm not a pray and spray or spray and pray. I forget how the phrase goes, but someone just goes and they take a picture of of something 100 times, and then later look for the best picture out of that. I try to slow things down to get the best quality that I can out of what I can with my equipment that I have. So I'm a single frame shooter. I don't do continuous. So my file sizes are not that big of an issue to me. But if you are a spray and pray photographer and you have a big megapixel full frame camera, it's going to slow down your writing speed and so forth and so on. So anyway, that's enough from me. I don't want to go on and on and on about sensor size. Does sensor size matter? Yes, it matters.
That's what she said.
Well, that's enough. I don't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak. And that's kind of cruel. Why would you beat a dead horse anyway? That's kind of a weird phrase, isn't it? But anyway, so this was Camera Talk with Dr. Scott, brought to you by Modesty Photography. And remember, we're here to, save you money, teach you tricks and little tips about photography here and there for beginners and, novices and hobbyists and enthusiasts out there. You professionals probably already know everything and probably teach me a thing or two. So if you're a professional photographer and you're still hanging around, hey, thanks for stopping by and listening to me babble on about sensor size. But last thing I want to talk about, second last thing I want to talk about is my little plug for Luminar and Luminar AI. That's the photo editing software that I use, and it's a great standalone. It's a great plugin for those who use Lightroom and Photoshop and whatnot. But as a standalone, it also does great work too, and it's economical. It's like $89. You buy it, it's yours for life. If you want a discount on it, $10 off, click below. I have a little link in there. Dr. Scott gets a little kickback from that. Yeah. So go ahead and buy it. You won't be sorry. It's a super bit of software, and you should be editing your photos anyway, because very rarely do they come out of the camera exactly how you wanted them, and they could always be improved anyway. Whether it's contrast or brightness or color or sharpness or anything else that goes along with that. So anyhow, so the last thing I want to talk about is stay safe out there, right? Because in the world of COVID, the Delta virus is out there, or the variant, and I also have a science degree too, so I know how viruses work, and we're at the Delta variant right now, and it's hopefully not mutating again into something worse.
Shit, oh my god! Oh my god!
To which I don't even want to go there, but get vaccinated. Vaccinations work. And all you anti-vaxxers out there think that, oh my God, it'll take years off my life, or somehow the government will control my mind, or who knows what kind of weird conspiracy theories people have out there. What the fuck? But that's all BS. So get your vaccine. So wash your hands, put your mask on if they require it. It's not that big a deal. I know it's not comfortable. I don't like wearing them either, but it's better than dying, right? So wear your mask. And if you like what you saw today, why don't you subscribe? And if you like Modesty Photography, if you like all my videos, subscribe. And if your girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife or whoever likes my videos too, because they think maybe I'm kind of cool or maybe I'm not, so subscribe anyway. And lastly, because I love the thumbs up girls so much, it's not just one, there's a lot of them. But, I want to show off the thumbs up girls, so give me a thumbs up, give me a like, so that I can show off the thumbs up girls. And you take yourself seriously, or not so seriously. Remember, in this world right now, it's weird things going on. I'm a university teacher, so I have to teach online. That's not so easy. I got to sit there and talk to myself at the screen because the students don't like to speak online. So they type in comments and stuff that, basically it's all about me online. I'd much rather be in the classroom, but this seems to be the new normal for now, so we got to deal with it. Hopefully it'll someday work itself out. But in the meantime, you have yourself a great week, a great weekend, and I will see you in the next video. Remember, you belong here, right? Yeah. So come on back next week. Okay. That's it from me. Bye-bye.
Here I am, Vietnam.